topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert Show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from experts on such topics as legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to our experts in community association law, estate planning law, tax relief, Medicare, public insurance adjusters, neuropathy treatment, business brokers, and personal injury law, along with many other topics. Now here's your host for the last 17 years, Steve O.
Welcome to another Expert Show. You know, we promote this as a California show, but it's actually, we do this on a national basis now. So we have brought this show, I think our first year was just California. I think a couple other states. We've grown this show. It's a national show now. Hey, we want to welcome our TikTok listeners and viewers. I got to tell you, this is a subject you rarely hear about unless it's in an ad. And it actually took me a year to pronounce it right. We have got the greatest attorney who represents folks with asbestos, mesothelioma, and we have found out from your letters, many people don't even know what it is, so they might have it and not even realize they have it and think it's COPD. So let me welcome to one of the top, folks, let me tell you something. I know you see ads on TV all the time. We were so lucky to get attorney Michael Mandelbrook because he is the top attorney when it comes to mesothelioma or asbestos. Hey, good afternoon, Michael.
Stephen, good to see you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always great seeing you. Thank you very much.
Hey, Michael, I got to tell you, it's so nice having an attorney in this field that I can trust, that I know that's not feeding me a bunch of bull. I know that you're an attorney that really cares about your clients. And folks, let me tell you something. I'm not trying to sound morbid or anything, but the clients that Michael represents are not going to be with us very long. And he knows that, and it must be so hard because I'm sure he becomes friends with a lot of these people, and it makes it so tough. But hey, Michael, since we got all these new viewers now on TikTok, tell everybody about your firm.
The name of my office is the Asbestos Legal Center, or the Mandelbrook Law Firm. That's me. I've been representing exclusively victims of asbestos diseases for about the past 30 years. Asbestos diseases include mesothelioma, lung cancer, asbestosis, and in some cases, other cancers as well. Many of the people, or most of the people I've represented throughout my career, are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, blue-collar workers, lifetime military members, people who really need help and can't afford a lawyer. One thing very unique, which I appreciate about my practice, and I like to say, is we haven't sent out a bill in 30 years. We're not one of, because our clients can't afford lawyers. We are not one of those lawyers who bills every phone call, every email, every bit of research, everything. That's not us. We have skin in the game in every case. We want to get the most money we can for our clients, the best compensation, get them everything they deserve. And if we do, then we make a percentage of the recovery. And so that's something I really appreciate about what we do. I'm not only unique in that I'm exclusive in this mesothelioma field, but I also, as a lawyer, I'm one of the few who hasn't sent out a bill in 30 years. So that's me, and that's a little bit about my office. We represent victims of all asbestos diseases, not just mesothelioma. And these cases do take time. As you mentioned, many of our clients do expire or pass away, which is, of course, always very, very sad. I miss many voices that you hear so often over the years. But that's just part of our practice and something that I've learned to deal with, and we move on and we try and help the family. The case doesn't end when someone passes. Now we're just trying to help the families. So that's a little bit about me.
Michael, have you ever had a client that didn't know? They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was until they found out they either had asbestos or mesothelioma. Are
It
there people
happens
walking
so
around that?
it happens so often, Steve. We have clients. Let me give you an example. Somebody's diagnosed with lung cancer, even, for example, and they may have worked around asbestos, but they also smoked cigarettes. In that situation, doctors, pathologists, and it's unfortunate, it's sort of an easy out. They always attribute it to smoking. So many people, for example, have called our office who, once we research and we have a radiologist look at their x-rays, we look at their work history to determine how they were exposed to asbestos, and we can determine that lung cancer was caused either by a synergistic effect, a combination of the smoking and the asbestos, or just the asbestos. It happens all the time in lung cancer cases, but you can imagine how many people, for example, get diagnosed with COPD, which is a disease typically caused by smoking. That stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Somebody goes in with severe breathing problems. They have a history of exposure to asbestos, but they also smoked. 99% of personal physicians that I've seen are going to attribute those breathing problems to the smoking and not the asbestos. We see it all of the time. But the lung cancer ones, we see quite frequently, very, very often. And look, I'm not a doctor. I can't just tell someone, hey, your disease was caused by asbestos. We get the medical records. We send them off to somebody who's trained in determining whether or not somebody has an asbestos-related disease, a radiologist, a pathologist, somebody who will look at, do some staining, for example, of some tissue on a biopsy. And doctors who know more about asbestos diseases than the local physicians. And I'm not trying to rip on local oncologists, physicians, pathologists, but I got to be honest, not a lot that I have seen. If somebody smoked and also has a lot of exposure to asbestos, will attribute the disease to asbestos versus smoking. Now, the rare instance that they do, of course, is mesothelioma, which many people think is a lung cancer or like lung cancer, but it's not. It is a unique type of cancer to the lining of the lung or the outside of the lung. If there's a doctor that attributes that cancer, mesothelioma, to smoking, we've got a problem, because the medical and scientific research is very clear that the only known cause of mesothelioma is exposure to asbestos. So mesothelioma, no doctors should get it wrong. The other diseases, quite often, yes.
Michael, is it that they just don't have a cure for it? Why does everybody eventually pass away?
Correct. Correct. There is no known cure for mesothelioma. As it was described to me like a doctor, and this was a doctor who does surgery on people with mesothelioma, is he described it like a spider web of cancer that grows around the lung, in the lining of the lung. And when you have cancer, the big risk is that it is going to metastasize or spread to other organs. And oftentimes, and I don't know if it's the location because it's on the lining of the lungs and so close to the other organs, or it's just in the lymph system, that ultimately it does spread to the other organs. And there is no cure. There is a radical surgery, which I personally don't recommend, that this same doctor described to me as like peeling an orange, but it can never be completely removed. And you can imagine when that's your lung, how severe that surgery is, the scarring, the recovery, and there's never been a complete removal of a mesothelioma. There has only been extension of life, 6 months, a year, 2 years, maybe if they're lucky. I will say, little things that people talk about just in everyday living do make a difference for people who are diagnosed. Nutrition, diet, not really exercise, but staying active and keeping the blood moving. But really, diet and nutrition is so important. I know, little things you hear about how they're just bad for us every day. But I know clients who have really taken a homeopathic approach and have been very diligent, have done, I feel, just as well as those who have taken the chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery approach.
Michael, we just got our first question from TikTok. I'm so glad there's an expert in this field finally. I want to know, how can we never hear of anybody passing away from mesothelioma?
That is, I don't know how you could not. Well, let me just put it this way. You don't, because probably not a lot of famous people die from mesothelioma. A few that come to mind, the most famous of all, by far, Steve McQueen. Okay, Steve McQueen was in the Navy, died at a very young age, developed pleural mesothelioma. It was on his death certificate. Merlin Olsen, you may remember him. He was a lineman for the Rams, and also Little House on the Prairie. He was in Little House on the Prairie. Merlin Olsen. He died of mesothelioma. The singer Donna Summer, It's My Last Dance. Donna Summer died of mesothelioma. You don't hear about it a lot because probably not a lot of famous people, like, maybe if it had a name like Lou Gehrig's disease, for example, people would know a lot more about it. But there's also, hopefully not as many Lou Gehrig's cases. There's only, between 2,000 to 3,000, maybe as high as 4,000 cases across the country, the U.S., and it's more like 2,000 cases a year, and that's only 40 per state. So you don't hear about it often. These cases are often, not often, but more often, say on the coast, for example, because you have a lot of shipyards where asbestos was used, a lot of construction. You don't have as many, and the laws are better for people who live on the coast. So you see a lot more cases and diagnoses on the coast, for example, than in Central America. But There's tons as well. Steel mills is a huge one. So you see a lot of cases out of steel mills, power plants, refineries, shipyards. Those are really military. Those were the big early cases of asbestos. And still to this date, we're surprised, even though they stopped, most companies took asbestos out of their products in 1975. So we're not talking about, that's sort of a later date. We're not talking 50 years ago. We're still seeing just as many diagnoses of mesothelioma as we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. The diagnoses haven't stopped. And so what it tells us is a couple of things. There's asbestos in products that we weren't aware of. We may talk about that a little bit, Steve. And that also, it didn't take a lot of exposure for people to get sick. So, for example, say somebody never worked around asbestos. They're 50 years old now, but their father worked at a steel mill when they were a kid, and they wore their work clothes home, and their only exposures was at a very young age, up until age 3, for example, when their dad got a new job. Many cases have been proven with very little exposure. So I don't know. I'm not a doctor or a scientist. I don't know why the cases haven't stopped, but there still is a consistent run of cases. Why you don't hear about it more? Maybe just because of not a lot of famous people have died from it.
I think that makes perfect sense. I actually know Donna Summer's sister very well. And I asked her one day, I said, why did Donna pass away? And she said it was because of 9/11. She lived like a block from there. And a lot of that, I guess, whatever it was, got into her system.
Her lungs.
Yeah, in her lungs.
When she died of a type of cancer that the only known cause of is exposure to asbestos, there's a fund set up for 9/11 victims that specifically addresses asbestos. And I think we may have touched on it in an earlier show. It's interesting because the Twin Towers that went down, they were being built just as asbestos was being outlawed.
Wow.
So one of those towers literally had like 30 floors covered with asbestos fireproofing on the steel beams, but the upper floors were not. They were using a replacement for the upper floors. And it has been speculated, and I still think it is incorrect, and I think the buildings would have went down anyways, but many have speculated that if asbestos was used on throughout those buildings on the fireproofing, they would not have gone down. I don't know if that's true or not, but I have heard it speculated. But with regards to Donna Summer, absolutely. And it was so tragic what happened during 9/11. None of us who are alive can forget. And I remember thinking, because they were being called heroes, doing cleanup work, and they were just wearing these paper masks. And I was thinking, all of these people, there's so many toxins in that dust, in that debris that these firemen and all these other people are going through. And just living by it, absolutely, it would make sense. When I thought about Donna Summer, what I actually thought about was, because she was a performer and probably early in her career performed on stage a lot, those curtains on stages used to be made of asbestos because they didn't want them to catch on fire. And so I used to think of asbestos curtains when I heard about Donna Summer. I didn't think about 9/11. I thought about all the times she must have performed in these old places that had and when these curtains open, I'm sure there's dust flying everywhere all the time. So that's just what I thought of, just as an
Wow,
aside.
I got to tell everybody this. We have actually had two lawyers, one from one of the largest mesothelioma law firms in the United States, who actually watches Michael's show. And I want to tell you this because normally we'll get people will call and they always say, "Oh, your expert doesn't know what they're talking about. We would be better. You should get us on the show." But we had two attorneys call us and tell us that the information that Michael shares with you is right on. And I've shared one of the firms with Michael before, but it just shows you, that his competitors watch his show, and just to let you know, the information that Michael's giving you was right on. I thought that was incredible, Michael.
Well, I can appreciate that because I think unlike many other lawyers, I think I've been very vocal in my criticism of other plaintiffs' asbestos firms. And, so without getting into details, it's always good to get compliments because, not only do we have a reputation, but we also have to have a conscience, and we've got to feel good about, what we say and comfortable with who we are. And, I guess a reputation is what other people think about you. So I always appreciate hearing it, but I'm also comfortable in my conscience. And so that brings me peace as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I was so, because one of them Michael is very familiar with, but we're getting a lot of people asking the same question. Maybe we're putting a little fear into people. How does a person know that he might have asbestos or mesothelioma? What are the symptoms that start off with?
I shake my head and I close my eyes because, it can come on so quickly. Asbestosis might be a little bit different. Like if, a lot of people just attribute it to old age. They start walking upstairs and they notice shortness of breath.
Yes.
Hey, I'm walking upstairs. I'm getting older anyways. Okay. So that's something. But, I always think of this client. I remember he was like 57 years old and he lived in the middle of Kansas. And I knew I was never going to be in this spot in Kansas again, but he had mesothelioma and he lived across the street from a school. And he's just like 2 weeks ago, I was just playing basketball out there at the school. He was still running pickup games at age 57. And he just, noticed a little pain in his back and a little cough. And I don't want to alarm people out there because 99.99999% of people don't have mesothelioma. But the symptoms can be very subtle: a little cough, shortness of breath, a pain in the side that doesn't go away. You hear all of these things. The standard symptoms that I've seen more frequently than any is breathing problems, which tend to get worse. Someone goes to the doctor, they first think they've got pneumonia, and then there's fluid building up in the lungs. So they drain the fluid and they notice something in the fluid, whether it's malignant cells or something. But it's fluid buildup in the lungs during severe breathing problems. If you were asking me what is the first symptom that I've seen most often in mesothelioma cases or diagnoses, would be fluid buildup in the lungs. That would be the big one. But like I said, the symptoms can come out of nowhere. And I always thought about that guy because I played basketball too. And I'm thinking, God, I hope at 57, but poor guy, he loved going out. He was playing with all these young kids and he loved it. But his hoop days were over.
So sad. Well, we got all these questions coming in. Let me start this one off. This is, see, with TikTok, they don't tell us where they're from. They just give us their handle. Whereas on YouTube, they tell us, and then our people who send in questions. But what are there other asbestos related diseases, Michael?
Recently, and you may have seen in the news, I don't want to say no because, I've been an asbestos attorney. I'm not a doctor. The ones that we typically see would be, of course, the mesothelioma, the lung cancer, the asbestosis, and the other cancers. But I would suspect a lot of the listeners have heard in the news, read in the newspaper recently about literally like 10,000 cases, it might be even 100,000, filed against Johnson & Johnson for asbestos-related ovarian cancer. Okay, so now we're talking about a different disease, completely different. Now, why it's related is because in Johnson & Johnson's baby powder, what you would find was talc contaminated with asbestos. And again, I'm not a doctor, but it's definitely this talc contaminated asbestos that is causing this ovarian cancer. I think currently there is I was thinking of the Roundup cases, but I know in the Johnson & Johnson cases, there's been a multi-billion-dollar settlement floated with the victims. So yes, ovarian cancer as well, outside of my thing, but many of the attorneys in my field I work with handle those cases, and we just send those to them. But ovarian cancer would be the answer.
Okay. So this is from Manny, wants to know, is asbestos still used, Michael?
It's gone back and forth where it's been outlawed by the EPA. I guess the answer to Manny's question would be where? In the US, I would say no, with the very, very rare exception of instances where it's needed, for example, for military equipment or other uses where there's very small likelihood of exposure. But generally, no, not building products, not in shipyards, ships, refineries, power plants. Now, there's a lot still there from when it was originally installed, but in the US, no. But you take these other countries, especially third world countries, and definitely China, they are using Russia, they are using asbestos to construct buildings just like we did in the 1970s now. They are using it extensively. They don't have, OSHA and these other laws, medical science on mesothelioma. They're not worried about those things. But in these countries, there's probably Brazil, there's probably like 50 countries that it is still used. Many countries, I think the EU's outlawed it completely, but it's more like these third world countries generally are absolutely still using extensive amounts. And for some reason, in my email, I get this asbestos shipped report every month, and it tells you all the tons and tons of asbestos shipped around the world. And so it's used extensively still, but not in the U.S. For new construction.
Here's a great question. We've never had this before. Thank you so much for bringing us this show. It's very informative. I live in Canada. Do you represent clients in other countries such as Canada?
It's interesting because we are currently in an agreement with a law firm in Canada who came to us, and they sort of noticed the same thing, that there was very few lawyers in Canada who represented victims of asbestos diseases, which was a surprise to both of us because there was a number of asbestos mines in Canada. They actually mined it in a number of places in Canada. And I think it was in Canada, there was a town that the name of the town was Asbestos. So you can imagine they had a mine there, but the name of the town was Asbestos. And so I know that the laws are different, but from my discussions with them, what we determined was that probably the victims that were exposed in Canada, 75% of the products, whether the asbestos might have been mined in Canada, the products would have come from the United States, which would have made US companies responsible. And we haven't mentioned these asbestos trust funds yet, but these asbestos trust funds also list a number of sites where their asbestos products were present, and there is hundreds, if not thousands, of Canadian sites on there. So what we determined was if these people are exposed, we would expect that they would have exposure in the US and that a case could be brought in the US. If their only exposures or to US defendants, if their only exposures were in Canada, then we would leave it to them, or I think the laws are much different than they are here on who you can go after and name. I think it's more employer based, and it may even be a comp type of claim through the government versus a litigation type of claim. So the answer is yes. There absolutely are many diagnoses, and yes, we do represent people, and there are lawyers who represent people, but not enough in Canada.
Here's another good question. We're getting great questions from TikTok. I'm curious to know, are there companies like Monsanto who are doing things to hide from having to make restitution to people?
Well, it's a good question. Monsanto sued in these cases. They made, I can't even remember what types of products, but like, for example, if somebody worked in a Monsanto plant, there would have been a boiler that had asbestos. There would have been insulated pipes with asbestos. So just for premises liability, Monsanto was responsible, like a lot of other companies. You take, similar companies, chemical companies, Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, many others who were involved with asbestos. They are regularly sued in these cases, and they always try and get out of liability, and that's what this litigation is for. But, you find these companies, oh, well, we destroyed all our documents relating to this. There's actually there's some asbestos trust funds that are trying to destroy all their documents right now. And basically what they're saying is we're trying to hide evidence of our liability. And all of these companies during litigation do try and hide it. Sometimes you have to get it from alternative sources. Maybe they were members of a different safety society, for example, where they got information about asbestos. So you'll have to go to that group or society or union or whatever they were and get all the information they have about Monsanto. So the answer is very rarely do companies go, yeah, we're responsible, it was us. That rarely happens, but we are typically able to get the evidence, and some companies are more transparent than others. And it's funny, the expectation on both sides, I have always felt, should be to be transparent. On our side, if you've got a client, you tell a defendant every time you think your client was exposed to asbestos. You can't lie to the defendants and say, no, they were only exposed to your product, not the others. That's not the way it works. You've got to be transparent, is always my view. And on the other side of the coin, the defendants, you should just open up your books. Here's when we had asbestos in our facility. Here's when we used it. Here's when we bought asbestos fiber. Be transparent. You're going to save lawyers a lot of money along the way. And on the plaintiff side, obviously not my office, but these big firms where I believe there's been a tremendous amount of fraud committed in these asbestos trust funds, be transparent about the claims you filed. Don't try and hide the claims that you filed to deceive others, to double dip against asbestos defendants. Be transparent, just like the expectation should be of DuPont, Dow Chemical, and the others to be transparent. But it seems in this litigation, I guess I'm the only one who thinks that way, because the plaintiff's lawyers sure aren't, these big guys, and the defendants never are. The Union Carbides, the Dow, but it should just be, yes, here's what we did. Here's all our products. Here's when we supplied to that site. If you've got a case, you've got one. If you don't, you don't. And in a lot of cases, we would say, hey, thanks for showing us. We don't have a case against you. You were right. We were wrong. But instead of making us, get documents and evidence, it's ridiculous. I mean, what happens in this litigation. So I wish there was more transparency on both sides. I think you froze on me, Steve. I don't know if I'm still on TikTok. Are you going to pop back in? Well, if I'm in TikTok alone, I will say, it looks like that I am. You can find me on TikTok as well, because this corruption that I talked about, exposing the largest coordinated fraud in legal history, I talk about it in a long series of videos at Mike_lawyer_CA. That is where you can find me on TikTok and learn more about me. So I'm hoping Stephen pops back in soon so we can continue the show. But if not, I will talk a little more. 2 weeks ago was the largest asbestos conference of the year in Las Vegas. I have attended every single year for the past 25 years. It's an opportunity to shake some hands with other plaintiffs, asbestos lawyers, see some of your, I guess you can call them competitors, adversaries, in some ways, because you are, fighting with them for cases in a lot of ways. And also some of the people who you feel are involved in a tremendous amount of racketeering and fraud. And the one thing I will say is it was surprising to me how few lawyers were at the conference in comparison to the previous 20 years. And I'm not talking about the general numbers, but I'm talking about the partners and the fiduciaries and the trust guys. None of them were present. I don't know where they were. Hey, Steve, I've just been talking this whole time. Hopefully we're good.
This is crazy. This has never happened before.
That's all right. I like TikTok. I'm on TikTok as well, so it gave me a chance to give the listeners my TikTok address so they can check out my videos as well.
Let's see. Does a lawsuit, make sure I can read this right. Boy, just everything has gone wrong with
That's all right.
Let
I
me
know.
see. Okay.
TikTok.
Okay, here it is. Does a lawsuit recovery impact a military disability?
No, no. Not only does it not impact a VA or a military disability, it's completely and utterly independent. But also, and this is really important, especially, well, for all cases, it's tax-free money. It is a personal injury recovery. It is not considered by the tax code, by the IRS, as income. So any recovery that our clients get goes right in their pockets. And, clearly significant for the clients who only get, say, $10,000. But imagine the clients who get millions of dollars. That is $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 more in their pockets that they don't have to pay the government. And so, no, doesn't impact VA benefits, doesn't impact pensions, doesn't impact retirements, and all of the recovery is tax free. Not for me. When we make money, we got to pay on it, but not the clients. We're not like a church.
Yes. So on the monetary side, do they have to file a lawsuit to get any money?
No, they really don't. The recovery, if we, there's cases where we say, hey, look, we can. Okay, the answer is no. You do not have to file a lawsuit. We can still get clients millions of dollars without ever filing a lawsuit. There are trust funds set up for asbestos victims, which we specialize in filing. And if a client opts to not file a lawsuit, we can still file claims with those asbestos trust funds and give clients significant amount of money. Now you've got a mesothelioma client. They're very sick. They can't leave their home. They will have a tough time sitting for an 8-hour deposition in a lawsuit. Do we file a case for someone like that? We try. And I'll tell you why, because the difference in recovery can be millions and millions of dollars for that victim. So what do we do in that situation? Say the deposition. Where are we going to do it? Well, if you can't leave your house, we're going to do it in your house. I've had clients in hospital beds doing their depositions with the lawyers around the bed. We're going to travel to where you are. You never have to travel, okay? You never have to travel. But to get these depositions done and have somebody say, this is how I was exposed to asbestos, when you've sued companies, the recovery becomes significantly greater for those who do file a lawsuit. So you can get a lot of money without filing a lawsuit. But those cases that you hear about in the newspapers, $20 million, $30 million, $8 million, $12 million, those are typically cases that have gone to judgment, the ones you hear about in the paper. But what I will say is 98% of these cases settle. So even if you opt to file a lawsuit, there's a 98% chance your case isn't going to trial. It's going to settle before trial, and you're going to get significantly more money. So I would say most clients do opt to file a case, but still there's that 15% of clients who just say, I don't even want a lawsuit. I don't want my name on a public record, my employer, or whatever, who knows, for whatever reason they are. And that's fine. It's their choice. But yes, we can still get them compensated.
That was, Michael, that was my last question before we froze on here, was what percent of your cases actually go to trial? You just answered that.
Very few. You'd be surprised at how few. Now, I will say a lot of it depends on the defendant. Like if we sue Johnson & Johnson in a case, I would say there's an 80% chance that one's going to trial. Okay.
Well, they're going to string it out, aren't they?
Companies, shipbuilders, Union Carbide, GE, Westinghouse, Dow Chem. These companies are sued in hundreds, if not thousands, of asbestos cases a year, but you never hear about them in a verdict or a trial because they settle every single one. And that's why. They settle or they're dismissed in every single one.
Well, Michael's with us every month. He'll be back in with us watching on TikTok. And this is a very interesting topic, Michael. People want to know because they have relatives maybe or friends or tell people how they can get a hold of you.
You know, I've started doing this. I've got an ad coming out in the Memorial Day edition of the USA Today that I'm just going to give my number. If anyone wants to text me directly, my cell phone number is 415-307-2119. My office number, 415-895-5175. And we also have a call center at 1-800-970-DUST. I'll talk to anyone. I'll help anybody that I can. And if I can't, I will point you in the direction of somebody who can.
Michael, give me your, again.
I'm sorry, you asked me for something and you cut out. My website is Mesothelioma.
Give me your cell phone. Give me your cell phone number.
415-307-2119. 415-307-2119. I'm going to put it in the private chat too as well, so you can share it if you didn't get it.
Beautiful.
All right.
Beautiful.
I appreciate it, Stephen.
We love you, bro. Have a good holiday Monday.
All right. You as well. See you next month. Thanks again.
For sure.
All right. We'll be better next month.
Thanks
again. Send me the show when it's done. I appreciate it.
I will do that. Hey, that's Michael Mandelbrot. He's an incredible mesothelioma lawyer. And hey, that's going to do it for us today. Hey, we'll be back again with you tomorrow at 2:00 Eastern time with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Experts show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.